All right, looks like we're just about back up to snuff to where we were with the number of attendees. So I'm going to move along here. Obviously, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out as we're going. I think we also may have lost any questions that were in the chat. So if you do have questions, feel free to send those along. Again, we'll get to those towards the end. So back to unemployment. So folks that you may have laid off in the last couple of weeks have been filing, we know. 76,000 claims or so in the last 2 weeks. That's more than applied all of 2019. So definitely the unemployment office is working on overtime. You know, the original staff was about 32 employees at the state unemployment office. And as someone who deals with them on a regular basis, they really are a great team, and they are working feverishly. If you need to get your employees to apply for unemployment, they can go to reemployme.maine.gov. That's the state's unemployment website. From within the Reemploy Me website on the right-hand side of the screen, it says Claimant Services, and they can go ahead and create an account, register, and apply for unemployment through there. We've seen a lot of folks successfully apply. We've seen many folks that have had issues when they are applying for many different reasons. In the end, I think most people are getting through and getting their unemployment filled, but it's definitely taking a while. We're seeing a lot of people that are having delays where, for whatever reason, I think if some people applied too early before laws were enacted and changes were made, those folks are actually seeing longer delays than people that are applying right now because they're going through the old process. There's a waiting period, things like that. Even though those have been waived today, at the end of the day, the folks that applied before all this happened are really just getting their delay. You as an employer can also create an account for the Reemploy Me system. You can go in there and view your benefit charges, and you can actually review claims, see who has been given unemployment, who may not have been given unemployment. If there are notices in there, you can respond to those a lot quicker than waiting for the mail. You can just print those off and fax them back, or print them off and mail them in. We are seeing a mixed bag of what is required of employers. You know, typically if someone gets laid off or quits or is fired and they go to request unemployment, the first thing the state does is turns around and says, why did they leave? How much did they make on their last check? And a bunch of other questions. We are not seeing the state send those out. It's pretty much an automatic approval. We've seen a few people get those, but I'm pretty sure that those are people that applied too early before the change was made. So for the most part, most employees are getting unemployment right as soon as they apply or pretty quickly thereafter. I know the state did have some issues with their funding this week where the folks didn't get paid on Tuesday as they expected. Their banking system had a little bit of a glitch because it was so overwhelmed. But in the end, I think people are getting through. The state has not yet implemented the additional $600 stipend that was included in the CARES Act. I know they're working towards that. It sounds like potentially next week will be included, but just know that that will actually be retroactive about 2 or 3 weeks. So folks will get a big check once they do get on there. Again, like I said before, we don't know what's going to happen as far as auditing and record keeping going forward. We don't know if or when or how the state may ever try to get caught up with this and do an audit to see who was actually supposed to be getting unemployment and who wasn't. So I would just, encourage you, make sure you're keeping good records of what, why, when, where, how you laid off employees, who claimed, etc. Just keep a COVID-19 folder in your file cabinet to put all this stuff in for someday. Who knows what's going to come down. With the high call volume, I know the state has added additional staff. They've been training around the clock. They've extended their call-in hours. I've heard a lot of folks have had a hard time getting through to them. So the state this week actually implemented new call-in days where employees with the last name of A through H should call on Monday, I through Q on Tuesday, and R through Z on Wednesday. Thursday and Friday are kind of a free-for-all. So if folks can't get through on their allotted day, they can try on Thursday or Friday. A little hint I have heard from a lot of folks that if they can't get through to the 800 number in Augusta, if you call your local career center, there are career centers in Sanford and Portland. I believe there's one in Topsom, Gardner. So wherever the career centers are, you can look those up online. You could try to call those numbers, particularly if folks are locked out of their unemployment account or things like that. A lot of times the folks at the career centers are able to help when, the waiting line at those is a lot shorter because people aren't necessarily looking for a job right now, but they still have, the same access to online services. So. Switching gears a little bit to some sick pay. So as part of the first coronavirus bill that was passed in March, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or as we affectionately call it, the FFCRA, there were fully refundable paid sick and family leave time allotted for small businesses, basically anybody with less than 500 employees. This is the first time I've seen the government use this 500 employee threshold. Usually they consider small businesses any less than 50, but every one of these coronavirus bills that's come out has said, less than 500 employees, which hits almost every small business in the country, which is nice. These allow you to pay your employees if they meet certain criteria, and what will happen is you will get the government will credit you through your payroll taxes for these wages. So if you pay someone $1,000 in COVID-19 sick pay, you're going to be able to take a credit on your 941 taxes, your payroll taxes, going forward until you fully recovered that $1,000. They are limited to certain categories. So as an individual, we're going to go over the criteria in just a second, but as an individual, you'll get paid 80 hours at your full hourly rate if you meet the criteria. If you are a part-time employee, you'll have to take the average, your 2-week average pay, and use that number. You don't get 80 hours, you get whatever your average 2-week pay is. And there are maximums on these. So the maximum is $510 a day or $5,110 for the 80 hours total. If you are taking care of family, and we're going to talk about the criteria in just a second again, you'll get basically the same benefit, but as a 2/3 hourly rate. So, and the limits are a little bit lower. So if you're home taking care of a family member and you're not sick, you can go ahead and get that at a lower rate. You get 8 hours of one or the other of these. You don't get both. You don't get 160 hours. You get 80 hours of one or the other. You can mix and match. If you want to do 40 individual and 40 family, that's fine. But again, you can't mix and match for those. The criteria for applying for these: if the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19, unfortunately, a stay-at-home order does not count. So if your business has closed because of a stay-at-home order, that does not qualify for you to pay out these sick leave. If your employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19, or is experiencing symptoms, or has been diagnosed with COVID-19, they will be eligible for that individual sick pay, 80 hours full pay. If your employee is caring for an individual who's subject to the items described in number 1 or 2, basically they're in quarantine or have been diagnosed, you can get that family sick leave at 2/3 pay. Also, if your employee is home from school, and because school's closed, obviously, you get the family rate as well. They did leave this number 6 open. Basically allows the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Labor and Treasury to designate any other sick pay criteria that they may want. They have not given us any specific guidance other than these first 5 bullets at this point. So, one of the things we've seen a lot of clients trying to do is say, hey, I lost, my business is closed because the governor issued a stay-at-home order and I'm not essential. I want to pay my employees the 80 hours of COVID-19 sick pay. That does not qualify. So you need to lay your employees off, unfortunately, so that they can collect unemployment. You're welcome to continue to pay them if you would like. That's certainly not a problem. We're all great people, and hopefully we can support our employees. But unfortunately, this reimbursable sick pay does not qualify for those criteria. There is a Family Medical Leave Act expansion in this as well. So as part of this, employees can get 12 weeks of job secured leave to care for their children, 10 of which are paid at the 2/3 rate. So basically the way this works is you take your 2/3 rate, 80 hours sick time for family, and you actually get pretty much 12 weeks of that. After the first 2 weeks, the maximum benefit's $10,000. And again, this FMLA provision only applies to those that are home caring for their children because school is out. So if their child care provider is unavailable. So this one we're seeing a lot more people take advantage of because a lot of folks are home taking care of their kids. From a documentation perspective, again, we want to make sure we're documenting these things. You really should ask your employees to request this time off in writing. I'm going to show you a template in just a second that will allow you to do that. Basically, all of these wages, if you use these provisions, if you pay out your sick time, your family sick time, or your FMLA, you get to take a credit on your federal 941 payroll taxes. So that includes federal withholding from employees, your Social Security and Medicare taxes, which are both employer and employee share. Basically, what you do is you just reduce the amount of the 941 tax that you pay each payroll until your full amount of payroll has been forgiven. We are expecting, we've not seen this yet, but we are expecting a new draft of the Form 941, which will have a line on it that says, hey, I took this much of a credit to pay for my FFCRA credits. That has not come through yet. We're just actually starting, to be able to work on these credits in an automated fashion as a payroll industry. So we're seeing a little bit of lag. These wages went into effect on April 1st. So we have to go back and we have to credit basically everything that happened from April 1st to today. If you don't want to wait until some sort of automated fashion has happened, you can fill out a Form 7200. This is a new form that the IRS has put out. Basically says, hey, I paid $1,000 in wages to my employees. I don't have time for you to credit my payroll taxes. I need the money now. You fax it in, and they're saying within 3 to 5 business days, you're getting the money. I caution you from using the 7200 form unless you're desperate. If you do use it, please, 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 as a payroll provider, please, please, please coordinate with your payroll provider, because if they're starting to take credits on your 941 payments on your behalf, and you've already requested the money back, it's going to create a reconciliation nightmare. So be very careful about this. We're already starting to think about how we're going to reconcile the end of the quarter this year, because we know that this is definitely going to be something that's going to be challenging. We've got money coming and going, and how do we reconcile that? So it's definitely something that we need to work through as an industry, and we're all working as fast as we can to come up with those things. Like I said, if you want, you should have your employees who are going to take advantage of these provisions fill out an emergency paid sick leave request form. Basically says, I'm allowed to take this sick leave because I meet one of the criteria that we discussed about just a minute ago, and just have them sign that. You are not allowed actually to request a doctor's note or other documentation, but you can request that the employee take the time off. And I think that you should do this, because if you ever get audited for for the use of these FFCRA credits, you're going to need to say why, when, and how your employees took this time. So it's a great benefit, but make sure you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, because at some point you will have to deal with this. The government just isn't going to give free money away and expect that we all follow the rules. So we will also send this out at the end of the presentation to everybody that is on the call. We also have a new labor law poster that Department of Labor has issued. You can get this online for free. All these folks that say, hey, I'm going to send you a labor law poster every year and charge you $79 a year for it, don't fall for that. You can go right online and get all the required labor law posters for free. You just print them and post them. This is one that has been just introduced, which talks about all the provisions we just talked about, so that employees know what their rights are, again, so that they can go through and get those benefits, get paid in the sick time. I'm just going to briefly touch upon the CARES Act and some of the loan provisions. I'm sure we've all heard about the PPP loan, and I know Brad did a presentation on financing yesterday, so I don't want to go too in-depth for it. But basically, small businesses can get a loan for 2.5 times their average monthly payroll, which can be used to cover payroll, utilities, rent, and interest. That loan amount can be up to $10 million. The principal and interest payments are deferred for 1 year, and if all of the eligibility rules are met, this loan will be 100% forgivable. We are just starting to see folks get money deposited into their accounts, And from a bookkeeping perspective, we're working really hard to make sure that employers are using the money for the PPP program for the things that they should only be using them for. So again, you need to use it only to cover payroll, utilities, rent, and interest on debt. The payroll piece is a little quirky because there are some parts of payroll that are not eligible for PPP loans to be used for. For example, it uses the exact same method that the loan was calculated by. So you can pay for wages, you can pay for your state unemployment, pay health insurance premiums, you can pay retirement contributions. What you cannot pay for with PPP loan funds are payroll processing fees. You can't pay your employer taxes. So the 7.65% you pay for Medicare and Social Security on an employer side and your federal unemployment, you cannot use your PPP loan funds to cover those expenses. Also, any wages over $100,000 can't be used, but can't be paid for with PPP funds. So we're just starting to work through that. I sent out an email this morning to my clients. I did post it on 3 Towns as well about what this repayment looks like and what the forgiveness process looks like. Unfortunately, we do not yet know what the forgiveness process is going to look like. We do not yet know what all of the provisions that they're going to ask for are. But we're just going to work really hard to follow the rules based on what we know today and make sure we document. And hopefully next July 1st, these loans will be 100% forgiven. That's what we're all working for. A couple of other parts of the CARES Act. They have introduced an employee retention credit. So if you continue to pay your staff in a shutdown, you can get a credit of up to 50% to cover their wages. The big stipulation is that the business must be fully or partially closed and have a significant decline in gross receipts of at least 50%. If this qualifies for you, you can certainly go through this and get these credits. We're seeing a lot of businesses that are closing down completely. They just can't afford to pay their folks. So this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but it is a benefit that's out there. Also, there's a payroll tax deferral. You can defer paying the employer portion of your Social Security tax only, so 6.2% for the rest of the year, and then you repay it in chunks. You have to repay the first half by the end of next year and the second half by the end of 2022. I am advising none of my clients to do this. One, because I think it's a bookkeeping and reconciliation nightmare, but 2, I don't want to see my clients digging a hole with the IRS. I've seen too many people get into the hole with the IRS, and I just think it's scary. The IRS is not a very forgiving organization, and it's not something you really want to deal with. I would use it as a last resort. It's out there, it's available. Use it carefully is my only advice. So, closing up here, just kind of figuring out what's next. We're all trying to figure out when we're going to be able to reopen, when life's going to get back to normal. It does sound like Congress is preparing for another round of stimulus. There's already horse trading going around with that, as far as I can tell. They're talking about potentially another $250 billion to help fund the PPP loans. I am actually surprised that they haven't announced they're out of money yet. I think that's only because the banks can't process the loans fast enough. I personally have seen several $1 million in loans come across my desk, and I'm a small company in Maine, so I can't believe that that they haven't run out of money yet. But we'll see what happens. They are also talking about another big business bailout. We don't know what that's going to look like. If it looks anything like the last time, it's going to be a free-for-all. But I would say they're working on another stimulus package to get the economy reopened when we can reopen. It's what it sounds like. We've already heard that a lot of businesses who are bringing H-2B or J-1 visa students over for workers for this summer, a lot of those agencies have already called them and said, hey, sorry, we're not sending your employees for this summer. 1, because the employees don't want to come, and 2, more importantly, because they can't get here. International travel is still shut down. So that is going to be a challenge for a lot of our seasonal businesses this year. We're certainly going to see, we don't know what the season is going to bring, but I think, adding further staffing challenges to that is only going to complicate the matter already. I've already talked to a lot of clients that have said, hey, I'm a restaurant. I don't know if I'm going to be able to open 7 days a week because I don't know if I'm going to have the staff. or we're going to have to cut back on meal options or whatever. Lots of things to figure out. Again, if you're going to bring your employees back from the layoff, be consistent and non-discriminate. Make sure if you're bringing them back, you're bringing them back in chunks, by class rather than individuals. Be methodical about that. Make sure that you're doing it properly. I think that if for businesses that are resuming, everybody's already talking about, well, we're not probably going to be able to bring everybody back 100% because we don't know what business is going to be like. We all hope that the bubble bursts, but we just don't know what that's going to look like. But be consistent. Again, be kind. Follow your process. Follow your policies. Make sure you're being consistent with that. So that's all I've got as far as HR and payroll topics for right now. Certainly, things are evolving. We're sending out more information as it comes in and as we figure things out. I'm going to try to keep posting them on 3 Towns and on our blog and our website and Facebook pages. So feel free to steal any of that information that you like. I guess we'll open it up to questions. Laura, are you keeping track of those somehow?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here. Elizabeth had a couple questions. Her first was about, you mentioned that it had to be an objective reason not to come to work, and she wondered what was covered under the term objective.
I would say it's any factual. Anything factual. I mean, obviously, if you're not making the workplace safe, that's certainly probably the biggest one. I would say if someone, if you're working in a closed office, you've taken social distancing measures, you've moved desks or whatever, you've shut the office down, I don't think that there's an objective reason why someone can't come to work. I think it's going to depend upon each individual business to take a look and see what their needs are. But I would just make sure it's, if you stop somebody on the street and said, does it sound like it's safe for my employee to come to work based on these criteria? That's an objective, calculation.
Okay. Elizabeth also wanted to know, how many times can one employee request the COVID-19, where am I? We just skipped there, sick time. Like if an employee took it for 2 weeks, but then came back for a week and then took it again, is that non-consecutive time covered?
If they get 80 hours and $5,110 total. So that's it. If they say they take 20 hours over 2 weeks and then they work normally for a week and then they come back, they can use the rest of their 60 hours, but they cannot take more than 80 hours total or $5,110 altogether. So, and these provisions go until December 31st of this year, and then these benefits go away altogether. So it's 80 hours until December 31st. Okay.
And Elizabeth and Nathan also pointed out that they received their PPP, and both of their loans say the first payment is due in November. So it's a 6-month deferral on those loans.
Okay, and that's entirely possible. Again, things are changing fast. I mean, we got really busy last week doing PPP applications, and then Thursday night at 8 o'clock, the SBA gave us new applications to fill out on Friday. So things are changing pretty rapidly as to what those look like. Again, follow the guidance from your banks because they're the ones that are going to be enforcing this.
Right, and we had Brad Page on yesterday, and he mentioned that I think Wednesday night they got new regulations, so that might have had partial to do with it. So,
yep.
Deb Elliott, wanted to know, I understand we cannot request a doctor visit or COVID-19 test from an employee requesting sick pay, but what about requiring one saying that they are clear to return? So can you request a letter from an employee saying that they are clear to return to work following COVID-19?
I am not 100% sure on that, but I will say I would use your best judgment. And, obviously we're following CDC guidelines at this point. I actually, unfortunately, have had an employee who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. So her quarantine time actually ends on Saturday, and we've not seen her for over a month. She's been working at home for that time. So fortunately, none of my staff has been exposed, but she did get diagnosed while she was out. And so she called me this week and said, hey, my quarantine time is up on Saturday. Can I come back to work on Monday? And I said, no. So I would say, I have told her I want her out at least 2 weeks past, her quarantine time, that she's fully recovered for at least 2 weeks, because I think that's the general guidance we're getting from CDC on that. So that's the common sense approach that I'm using. I don't know, I don't believe that, in a lot of these situations, I know for my employee, they basically were said, yep, we think you've got it. We're going to treat you, just go home. Call us if it gets worse. So they're not really even under any observation from a doctor on an ongoing basis. So I'm sure if you really wanted to request a letter, I think you could, or some sort of certification from the employee themselves. But again, I would use common sense and make sure you're protecting the rest of your team when you do that.
Okay, and she's awesome anyway. Here's a question from Nathan. He said, you might not have this information yet, but how many hours do FTEs need to work a week to be counted towards forgivable payroll costs with the PPP?
So we don't know that yet. They've not given us what that FTE count is going to look like, or what period it's going to be measured against. What I have started to read, what I'm interpreting through the law, is that the period is going to be January 1 of this year to February 15th of this year. So it's actually a 6-week period, which is kind of a weird measurement period. And they're going to use the FTE calculation method that they use to calculate for the Affordable Care Act, which basically says if you work more than 30 hours, you are considered a full-time equivalent employee. If you work less than 30 hours, we take your hours and we divide them by 30 and figure out what fraction of a full-time employee you are. That guidance has not been issued, which makes it much more difficult to make sure we're abiding by that. And again, that's a strict interpretation on my part of what that's going to look like. We do not have official guidance from the Department of Labor or SBA on what that's going to look like yet. But that's the early indication that that's what they may be using, is that 6-week period, January 1st to February 15th, and the ACA calculation method.
Okay, Stacy has a question. She said, if we secure a PPP loan, should we rehire those who are currently on state employment, even if they will not be working because of childcare?
Yes, so the whole idea with the PPP loan is to get everybody off unemployment and get them back on payroll. The PPP loan is somewhat self-serving to the government because they want the payroll taxes. So basically, they're going to come in and you have to put them back on payroll because you have to maintain your FTE count. If you can get a little creative with that, if you wanted to pay a part-time employee full-time amounts, you certainly could do that, to maintain your FTE count. But if you want your loan forgiven, you're going to have to bring everybody back. And I already know, I've heard a few employees that are grumpy because they're just about to get this extra $600, and they probably are going to be making more than they would working, or back on payroll. So those employees may get a little grumbly about that. But at the end of the day, I think we'd rather all have our employees back to work anyway. And whether or not they are working, you have to put them back on payroll for sure. It's definitely not a fun topic, but I think it's the way the program was designed, and that's the way the cookie crumbles.
So Elizabeth had a question a little bit about that as well, I guess. Is it okay to ask which employees would like to come back? Because obviously the $600 bonus is motivating people not to want to return to work. She was just concerned that asking people to return would create bad feelings because they're home making more money.
Right. I mean, again, be consistent. If you're bringing people back, I think you need to bring everybody back. Because that's how the PPP program was designed, was to get everybody back onto payroll. So whether they like it or not, it may give them some hard feelings because they made a few extra bucks. But that's the way the law is written today. And I wouldn't ask them because, of course, most of your employees are going to say, sure, why wouldn't I collect unemployment? Then you risk your PPP loan forgiveness, and I don't think you want to do that as well either. So.
Yeah, and I was on a call earlier today with the Maine State Chamber and the SBA, and they were saying that if you ask an employee back, and they don't want to come because they're making more at home, but if you, offer them their job back and they refuse, they lose the additional $600 benefit. Yeah,
and I think they actually, they could potentially lose all of their unemployment benefits again, yes, if and when if they ever come and audit this.
Right, absolutely. Stacy had a question. If we have the PPP loan in place, do we still use the 80 hours from the FFCRA?
You can use the 80 hours even if you have a PPP loan in place. However, you cannot use the PPP loan to pay for your 80 hours of FFCRA sick pay. So we have lots of acronyms here. So you can still use those provisions, but you just can't use the PPP loan proceeds to pay for it. So you have to back that out of whatever you're using to pay for that. I'm hoping for our clients, I'm trying to build some custom reporting that says when you run a payroll, what is included and what isn't included in PPP funding, so that you can track that on your end and make sure that you're keeping track of it. You know, I've heard, you know, folks are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars just depositing in their checking accounts in their banks, and we're working with our bookkeeping clients to make sure that we're tracking those appropriately. It's definitely going to be a bookkeeping project, and I encourage you to think about how you want to handle this now, not in 8 weeks or next year. You know, make sure you're keeping documentation of how much you're using the PPP funds of your payroll to cover.
Yeah. Elizabeth had another question, and I've unmuted you, Elizabeth. Did you want to ask that? Elizabeth?
Yeah. Oh, there. Okay. I just
go.
unmuted myself. Yeah. No, I just wanted to clarify the reason for my question, why I asked about asking who would like to come back, because normally this time of year I wouldn't have my full staff because I'm very seasonal. So I have 5 people on unemployment right now, one of whom only is a year-round employee. So to try to maybe alleviate some of the negative feelings about coming back to work, you know, you're saying be consistent. Is it okay to say, who would like to come back now? Because I can pay 2 of you, you know, for example.
So it sounds like you may, just in the big picture, it sounds like your FTE count for January 1st to February 15th may have only been 1.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So for this 8-week PPP period, you only have to maintain 1 FTE count going forward. So if you have extra money, you certainly can use that. You can use up to 100% of your PPP loan to cover these payroll expenses. So I think in that situation, you could say, hey, does someone want to come back? You know, or, you know, if you're starting today, you may wait to, you may wait to just put, you know, hopefully you're going to open Labor Day or whenever you're going to reopen, or excuse me, Memorial Day. Hopefully you're not waiting for Labor Day to reopen. You're going to be open on Memorial Day, and you put them back on payroll then. So, and you have some revenue to help offset these, you know, the PPP funds.
Right, right. Now, there was another comparative period as well. It was last year, I think, February through June. Like, I understand that we can choose between the 2. Obviously, to me, the most favorable one would be that January to February.
Yeah, we're not 100% sure on that yet. So, okay. Unfortunately, I've not seen any guidance. I'm not sure if the banks have on what that forgiveness calculation is going to be based on as far as a time period.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And we have a question from Nathan. If you want to unmute yourself, Nathan.
Unmuted. Thanks, guys. Chris,
Hey,
I had a question for you about the loan in general. So we apply, we get the maximum amount, but we may not use all of that. Now, I read there are no repayment penalties. In other words, anything we think is not forgivable or is not beneficial to us at the end, we can pay that amount back immediately and simply hold the forgivable portion until we apply for forgiveness. Is that correct?
That's my understanding as well, but I would have you talk to your bank. I don't think any bank is in a position at this point to take any money back, to be perfectly honest with you, because I'm not even sure most banks have their documentation ducks in a row yet. So
sure
don't get too excited yet to give the money back. But my understanding is yes. I think you could if you didn't use $10,000 of it, you could give it back tomorrow and say, you know, I don't need this.
Sure, and I think in the end it would be at the end of the 8 weeks, obviously, where you would.
Yeah, obviously, you'd want to wait till the end of the 8 weeks, and if you don't use it, I would encourage you to try to find a use for that, and you and I can talk afterwards if you want to think about some creative ways to do that. But
I actually don't know that it'll be an issue, but yes, thank you, I appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify my previous question about FTEs. I understand you don't know how exactly they're going to do the count of total FTEs. My question was more in regards to what is an FTE, and I think you answered it by saying it's 30 plus hours.
Yep. So according to ACA standards, which I think that's what they're going to use, You know, when we do our Obamacare calculations at the end of the year for health insurance, we use this ACA formula, and that basically says if you work consistently 30 hours in the measurement period, which we don't know what the measurement period yet is, you are considered one FTE. If you work less than 30 hours in that measurement period, you're a fraction of an FTE.
And I imagine whatever that works out to be, that'll be the amount we need to pay them. Because if they're not actually working, we don't need to pay them 40 hours, but we need to keep
Correct.
them on as full-time, which would be 30
Correct.
plus hours. Okay,
Correct.
good. Thank you.
So you could pay them 31 hours and be fine.
Oh, perfect. That's great.
Or 30.01, I guess. So
I'll do the generous 1 hour there. Okay, thanks guys.
Okay, last call for any questions.
I have one, if it's Elizabeth, if I can
Sure.
ask. So I watched a webinar put on by Maine Biz the other day, and my interpretation of the FTEs was that they would be kind of averaging it out so that if I had 2 people on for 20 hours a week, that would be 1 FTE. Is
exactly.
that okay?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So because they work 20 hours, they're technically kind of a fraction of a person.
Yeah.
So and you would just have a fraction of a person they are, and add them all up, and that would get you to your number of full-time equivalents.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, Chris,
And
I
Nate,
want to
did you have one more?
Yes, I
You
did.
okay?
Sorry. And if there aren't enough paper trail specific people here, we can answer this after the fact. But I was going to actually ask you this before, if it was possible for you to create custom reports in that client report dropdown, because I know there are like 100 reports to choose from. I didn't know if you created those.
So we didn't I've actually requested from iSolved a report that says what, and for it if they're going to charge me for it, but I've requested that we get a report. So we have a CARES report now that we gave it to a lot of folks to get the application done. So they already have the formula of what's eligible and what's not eligible. I just want it on a per payroll basis, basically. So we can say these are the wages that are eligible for PPP funding, and this is what's not eligible for PPP funding. I've got really positive feedback when I submitted that to iSolved, so I'm hoping that we will have that. You know, they've been pushing out reports and updates to us daily and weekly. They've been awesome. So we've been, I get a report like that quickly.
That's great. And obviously, I don't think it's any rush. Really, we need the report in 8 weeks, right? So.
Right. Yep. And that would be the latest. And hopefully, I hope we'll have that, like I said, they've been really good about pushing stuff out. Usually Friday's their update day. We've been getting updates pretty much every day. They've been pushing out as they're building reports and building screens and figuring out how these credits work and everything. They've been really great to be pushing these out to us, and which is making our lives a lot easier. So I'm really grateful for that.
Great. Thank you.
Well, Chris, there's a lot of thank yous in the chat messages too, and I want to add mine. Thank you so much. This was hugely helpful. We will definitely get out to everyone all the documents that Chris is willing to share. We'll try to get those out to you later today. And we will get this uploaded to our YouTube channel, all 2 parts of it. But thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. I just want to remind people that Chris is back as part of a panel on our Tuesday session that's at noon for businesses that are thinking outside of the box during COVID-19. So please join us. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.